Last week we talked about the Great War and we finished the lesson with the peace settlement. Now, in this lesson, we talk about 20 years, the 20 years between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II. And in those 20 years, our focus is going to be the creation of totalitarian dictatorships, the governments that developed in 3 of the countries that participated in the Great War. This lesson has so many topics that we are going to touch on some of them, but remember that you need to, once we go over the introduction to the lesson, you need to go over each of the topics in detail. And the first topic that we need to mention is the economic situation during those 20 years. And for the first years, I would say for the first decade after the war, it seemed that all the countries were going economically toward prosperity. But then the Great Depression came, and that caused tremendous turmoil in every country. Many countries were affected, but there were 2 countries that were especially affected by it, and they were England and Germany, especially Germany, because Germany had been hit so much by the Treaty of Versailles and by the reparations that they had to pay. So what happened as a result of the Great Depression? Certainly, if the governments had been powerful before, with the Great Depression, the governments had to be more involved in the economy. There were social issues like the fact that the men lost their jobs, but many women did not, and so that created a great deal of tension in the families and in general in society, because men had nothing to do, so they got together in gangs and they started listening to speeches by demagogues, etc. Then, politically speaking, as you can see here, totalitarian regimes began to appear because of the situation, the economic situation that existed in those countries, specifically in those 3 countries. And then, ideologically speaking, do you remember that we said that right before World War I, nationalism had become stronger than socialism? Well, now there is a reversed process. Now, because of the failure of the capitalistic regimes, because of the failure of the democratic leaders, many people are wondering if socialism or Marxism is not a better solution to the countries than the failed capitalism was. So let's mention briefly what totalitarian regimes are. The first thing that we need to know is those governments were the rule of one party. So we do not have, in any of those countries, once the regime took over, there was no 2 or 3 party struggle. It was just one party rule. The other important thing is, in each of those countries, the government promoted fear. fear to the other countries, fear of economic bankruptcy, fear to everything. And because of that fear, individual freedoms were limited. And once the people in the country accepted that their individual freedoms were going to be taken away from them, then they started accepting slowly all the different aspects of a totalitarian regime. For instance, what you see here, and I'm going to put the list very briefly: arrest without due process, and then once you are arrested, they are going to torture you to get information, even though it is well known that information that you get through torture is usually not correct. People are going to say whatever the torturers want them to say, but they started using torture. In all three places, they established a secret police, and they gave the police more power than any other time before that. And this is something that I would like for you to look at and watch: active obedience. Active obedience meaning you cannot just let the government do and you do your own things. You need to actively participate in the political life of the country. You are not allowed to oppose. You don't have to expect any privacy, and fear continues to be the reason given for all those measures. So the promotion of fear was something very, very powerful during that time. In all three regimes, there is cultural life, there is intellectual life, there is university life, but all aspects of culture are controlled by the regime. Beautiful, wonderful art is produced during that time. Literature is produced, but all of it is to promote the state. The government is there to, as we say, control the mind and the heart of the subjects. Emotionally, the majority of people agreed with the government, or at least showed agreement with the government. And finally, and this is one of the important features, the government is not going to wait for you to do something to punish you. The government is going to preemptively arrest you or control you if they think that you are going to oppose them or to do anything to undermine the power of the government. Remember, Italy, Mussolini, the Soviet Union, Stalin, Germany, Hitler. Out of those three, Mussolini, even though he is the one who invented the term totalitarianism, even though he wanted very much to show the world that he was imposing a totalitarian regime, but he is the one who established the least totalitarian of all those regimes. Something important also is all three rulers took power legally. So there was no revolution, no coup. It was a legal takeover. In the case of Mussolini, it was the king, Victor Emmanuel, who gave him the power and made him Il Duce. So Il Duce had all the power that King Victor Emmanuel wanted Il Duce to have. And once he became Il Duce, then the liberties of the Italian people ended. Any group, any association, any organization that was not following what Il Duce wanted was dissolved. There was control of the press. It was control of the means of communication. Il Duce wanted to defend the church, the monarchy, Victor Emmanuel, and the state. And if any media didn't do that, Il Duce went after them. And certainly arrests without due process were common. As I said before, the question is, how totalitarian was he? Not that much, but that was because he could not do any better. So he was not effective enough to do what he wanted to do. He could not control the communication or the any cultural activity. He could not control even the minds and activities of the young people. He organized the youth organizations, but he could not make them do, he could not make them have the discipline that he wanted. He did have one very interesting success, and it was with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the popes, had opposed the unification of Italy that happened the previous century, the 19th century. And the popes opposed it because, remember, last semester we studied the creation of the papal states. The popes had land that belonged to the church, and the pope was the head of that land. When Italy was unified, the pope was expected to give up his land, and the pope refused to do that. And this conflict had been going on for decades. Mussolini was very interested in having the support of the Catholic Church. He made an agreement with the Pope. And this very famous agreement, this is called the Lateran Accords, was very beneficial to Mussolini because the Pope agreed with Mussolini and supported Mussolini and told the Catholics in Italy that Mussolini was a good guy. On the other hand, Mussolini gave the Pope officially a state. It is a very tiny little state. It is about 1 square mile within the city of Rome, but it is an independent state, and the Pope sends ambassadors to the United Nations, and the Pope visits other countries as a head of state. Something that I would ask you to focus on, there are several video clips in this lesson about it, and it's very important to understand not only what happened, but why it happened, and it is Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie was an amazing person. He had done so much for Ethiopia, and he was a great person. He's still admired by many people today. He has become a revered person today. And even though he was doing a great job as the king of Ethiopia, Mussolini decided that he was going to renew the concept of the Roman Empire. He was going to revive the Roman Empire. And the way to do it was invading Ethiopia, one of the few areas in Africa that was not controlled by the Europeans. So he decided to do it. He planned carefully. The technology that Italy had was way superior to any technology that Haile Selassie could have. Haile Selassie begged, asked the League of Nations for help. The League of Nations ignored him, theoretically condemned Mussolini, but did nothing, absolutely nothing, to prevent Mussolini from invading Ethiopia. It was one of those events that make you realize that the world countries do only what is convenient for them. It was not convenient to defend Ethiopia against Mussolini, and Mussolini took over. And King Victor Emmanuel became officially the emperor of Ethiopia, and so Mussolini revived the Roman Empire. And this is the only thing I'm going to mention about Mussolini and his fascist state. Now let me go to Germany, and again there are many aspects of Hitler's seizure of power that I would like for you to analyze. Analyze first how Germany was before Hitler took over, meaning right after World War I, what was happening in Germany, how was the new government, because remember that the German Empire disappeared and a republic was established. So analyze all that, analyze the economic problems that Germany was dealing with, analyze the psychological problems that Germany suffered because of the guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles, and then look at the stages, how Hitler took power. One of the topics, one of the big events that I would like to mention is the Beer Hall Putsch. Look at it, see what the significance of it is, and remember that the result of this is that Hitler was in jail, and it was during he was in jail that he was able of writing his famous Mein Kampf. Analyze Mein Kampf, notice how during this time Hitler is already telling the world what he thinks, what his ideology is, and what he's planning to do. He spells out everything in Mein Kampf that he did afterwards. Why is it that the world did not take him seriously? This is one of those questions, because he said what he was going to do, he said why, and he even said how. And that was way before he did it. Looking to the Enabling Act, how this was significant, because this is what gave Hitler the power. And then at the death of the president, then he remained the chancellor, and that's when he became Il Führer. And as far as the Jews goes, he followed what he announced he was going to do, and he did it very slowly. I want you to look at the dates, because this is the decade right before World War II began, and see how slowly he did it. And he did it in a way that the German people thought it was the right thing to do. The boycott to the businesses owned by Jews, for instance. If the Jews are being so wealthy during a time that the rest of the German people are suffering hunger, you would understand why many of the Germans would say, yeah, let's boycott the Jewish businesses so the rest of the country can have a way to live. Why are we going to allow the Jews who, and Hitler had been very careful to insist that the Jews were not German, why should we allow non-Germans to have important positions in the universities or in the businesses? in all the different professions. So the German people were thinking, this is something that it is okay. And then slowly he went into more anti-Semitic policies like the Nuremberg laws. And then eventually in 1938, notice this is 1 year before the beginning of the war, there was a specific event, Kristallnacht, and that was really the turning point of the beginning of the serious attacks to the Jews, and we will talk about the Holocaust when we talk about World War II, because the Holocaust really happened during the war. All what we are looking at now is the stages that led to the Holocaust. And at this point, in 1938, still the Jews can leave Germany. In fact, at that point, Hitler is encouraging the Jews to leave. And those who left were the lucky ones, because a few months later they could not leave, and that's when the Holocaust began. And with this, we finish the introduction to Hitler, and then we start the introduction to the Soviet Union. We left Russia when Lenin died, remember? This is the last thing I had shown you, the preserved body of Lenin, and here is, after Stalin died, the preserved body of both of them. Both of them were at the Kremlin for some time. So what happened after Lenin died? We had two very powerful men. We had Stalin and we had Trotsky. Lenin had written a document saying that he did not want Stalin to be the ruler. He wanted Trotsky. Trotsky was a brilliant ideologue. He was a great military leader, and he was very good friends with Lenin, and he was certainly a much better person than Stalin. Stalin was mediocre. He was a good organizer. He had been the secretary of the Communist Party, and because of that, he knew many people. And but the most important thing, I guess, is they had different, within the communist ideology, they had different ways to see the communist ideology. For Trotsky followed more the Marxist idea of permanent revolution. Trotsky believed that the workers across the world needed to take over the governments. In other words, Trotsky wanted to have a permanent revolution in the world until communism took over in the world. Stalin believed that they should focus first on the Soviet Union. And once communism was well established in the Soviet Union, then they could spread to other places. This is what was called socialism in one country. And Stalin manipulated. He had some key figures that were going to do the dirty job for him, and he manipulated in a way that finally the Politburo accepted him and not Trotsky. Trotsky went to live in Mexico, and in a beautiful house in Mexico. He spent the rest of his life writing, and but Stalin was still not very happy, just knowing that Trotsky existed, and then he sent an assassin who stabbed Trotsky in his house in Mexico City. And there is a museum in the house that belonged to Trotsky. There is a Trotsky museum that is really very powerful and very beautiful. And then Stalin became the ruler of Russia. And he took total control of Russia, and as soon as he took control, he began the harshest rule that the world has ever seen. Anybody who would remember how Lenin had ruled was eliminated. Any old communist was eliminated. This is what is called the purges. And he established an absolutely totalitarian dictatorship in Russia. And he had very specific plans for Russia that still today many organizations use the term, the 5-year plans. He coined the term, the 5-year plans. And his 5-year plans were very straightforward. He said what he wanted to Russia to do, he wanted to achieve for Russia, and he did. And this is just a summary of some of the things that your book has. Just look at this. Steel production quadrupled in 10 years. So this is after the second 5-year plan. Coal production 7 times in 10 years. Annual growth rate 14 to 20%. He is accomplishing something that was never heard of. Russian industrialization was growing at a pace that was unheard of. This, of course, at the cost of real wages and the living conditions of the people. As far as agriculture, the agricultural output was amazing. He started what is called the collectivization, and he achieved that. Before he did that, if you remember when we talked about Lenin and his NEP, his new economic policy, remember that we said that Lenin had allowed peasants to start selling their produce, and this allowed a few peasants to become wealthy, and those peasants were called the kulaks. Stalin could not stand the existence of the kulaks, and he decided to eliminate, and this is what he said, the elimination of the kulaks as a class. He sent thugs everywhere across the land looking for kulaks and killing them. It was a carnage, and Stalin started not only killing but sending people to death work camps in Siberia. And it was, just look at this, the total amount of people who died in all the countries in World War I died, the same number died in the Soviet Union during this time, during Stalin's time. Stalin killed more people than Hitler did. We'll see that in a second. So let's make a summary of the ideologies, because what I wanted you to see is that the ideologies that Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini had were not to the right or to the left. We cannot say these ideologies were all right-wing ideologies or left-wing ideologies, because if you notice here, see what we see here. Hitler was an anti-communist, as Mussolini became, even though at the beginning he was a socialist, and Stalin was a communist. So we have the worst dictators and harshest dictators that we've had were 2 anti-communists and 1 communist. What are their other ideologies? I want you to notice something interesting. The one ideology that they do have in common is this one: nationalism, nationalism, and nationalism in the case of Mussolini. In the case of Hitler, nationalism led him to want, because he claimed the Germans needed more living space. And also nationalism was used because he appealed to the anger of the people of Germany for how much they had been humiliated during war. And then, and this is mainly in Hitler, Mussolini and Stalin did not have that ideology as part of their strong mentality, but Hitler did accept fully social Darwinism. He basically followed the ideology of social Darwinism and acted consistently with social Darwinism. As far as women goes, again, their policies were interesting and different. Look at, for instance, let's compare Hitler and Stalin. Both of them believed that women should have children. However, the approach to that was entirely different. In fact, under Lenin said that there was total equality between men and women. And notice that this is even before the end of World War I. This is before in the West women got the vote. And Lenin already said there is total equality between men and women. In fact, in the United States, just in the last years, it has been discussed if women should have equal pay. And this has been an issue. Well, Lenin said total equality. Women should have the same opportunities as men, and women should have the same job opportunities and job pay as men. Lenin also said that divorce was obtained easily both by men and women, and women had the decision whether or not to do an abortion. And this is under Lenin. Now, Hitler was kind of wishy-washy. He wanted women to have children, but only Aryan children. So, children who were of pure breed. He wanted women to be wives, he wanted women to be mothers, and this is one of the slogans that existed during the time of Hitler. Get a hold of pots and pans and brooms, and you'll sooner find a groom. So women still had the image of femininity. However, women were allowed to work outside of the home, but there are professions that are appropriate for women, like nursing, social work, or teachers. So it's okay for women to do that. This is what Hitler thought. However, once World War II began and they needed women, Hitler was the first one to promote women going to the factories and to the production of arms or anything. So during the war, he forgot his ideal situation for women. Now, Mussolini was the most conservative of all three. Mussolini believed that women belonged in the home. Women should be the homemakers. He said, and this is not different from what many people even today believe, that it is the natural and fundamental mission in life of women is the production of children, and that women should stay in the home taking care of their children. And certainly men don't have to do that, don't have to stay home, because this is the women's role. He tried to limit as much as he could. He was not effective, but he tried to limit women from working outside the home, and he gave awards to women who had children and grandchildren. So it was like the award to the woman with the most number, the greater number of children, and the award to the woman that had the greater number of grandchildren. And he gave, of course, subsidies for to families with many children. So we see how interesting it is, the different approach that each of those three had toward women. And this is getting a little longer than I wanted, but I still have to make a comparison between the terror policies of each of them. We have mentioned them, but here is the summary of it. Hitler had the SS. The SS was in charge of the master race, of promoting the master race. He had the Gestapo, the secret police. He had the labor camps that we know a lot about, and the gas chambers. And he sent to labor camps and gas chambers not only Jews, but homosexuals, gypsies, many Catholics, and many people who opposed him. We hear a lot about the Jews, but any homosexual that he knew about and he found out about was sent, and also gypsies and Slavs if he found them. Mussolini is the one that we would say that is the least harsh of the three. At the beginning especially, he did torture people with castor oil. I don't know if you're familiar with castor oil. With castor oil, if you drink in excess, produces stomach problems like diarrhea and big stomach cramps. Of course, that's nothing compared to the gas chambers. And Mussolini did have the secret police. He did have the arrests and imprisonment without due process. He did have some torture. He did have the secret police. Those were in charge of the arrests and some torture. And he didn't kill that many people. So he was a dictator. He tried to be a totalitarian dictator, but his terror policies cannot compare with the other two. And Stalin began with the elimination of the kulaks as a class, continued with the death of those peasants that we talked about, continued with his purges of any old communists. He had the Cheka, which was his secret police, and then he had the death camps that were called the gulags, and they were supposed to be labor camps, and they became really death camps. And in total, if you can see, Stalin eliminated and killed over 10 million people, all of them Russian people. So Stalin did not even have the excuse, if we can call it an excuse, that Hitler had, that the Jews or the Gypsies were aliens. They were not German. They were not his own people. Stalin killed or had killed or let die his own people, 10 million people. In fact, there are some mass graves that have been found, especially in the area of Poland, that many people for years thought they were Nazi graveyards, and now they have found out that they were Stalin's mass graves. So Stalin was perhaps the worst that we've had, even though Hitler is infamous for his, and when we think of the way Hitler did it, certainly it is repulsive to think of what he did. But this is the summary of the terror policies. And with this happy note, we end the lesson. And again, like in previous lessons, now it's your turn to go and look at all the topics that I have just mentioned.